stands to speak if no one prays? These very stones cry out, I am.
Shalom, hello again, and back to our series, The Stones Cry Out. I'm surrounded by stone artifacts here because we're in the burnt house. This house is from 70 AD. The family called Catros lived in this house. We know that. We found stamps that they used to stamp letters and so on. The Romans burned this place. They left their spear and other evidence around the house, and of course the stone artifacts the Catros family used, which were considered kosher, that is impervious to contamination by the rabbis. So stone was very important in this time. Stone was important too in these ancient cities which were made of stone. Megiddo is the one we're going to consider on this program. Megiddo is a very famous name. If we put the word hill with it in Hebrew, the hill of Megiddo is Armageddon. Or Har Megiddo in Hebrew is Armageddon in English. In Revelation 16:16, a famous verse, he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. That battle, of course, will end all battles. There have been many wars at Megiddo and in the Valley of Armageddon in northern Israel, a flat, fertile valley. Napoleon pronounced it a great place for a final battle. King Solomon considered a very important city for controlling the trade routes of the north, and he put in one of his splendid six-chamber gates, a huge grain silo, and a fascinating tunnel we can still walk through down to the water source of Megiddo. We'll go to Dr. Tom McCall on location.
Megiddo is located on the southern edge of the Jezreel Valley, about 55 miles north of Jerusalem. Although the adjacent valley has been the site of some of the most celebrated battles of the ancient world, today it is a peaceful, well-watered plain known as the breadbasket of Israel. I met here with archaeologist Ross Voss and asked him to share some insights regarding the historical significance of this ancient city. I started by asking him about Megiddo's strategic importance.
Well, the site of ancient Megiddo sits on the crossroads between the coastal highway going north-south and the main east-west road going east to Syria and up to Damascus. So it was on one of the main trade routes in the Levant in the Bronze Age and in the Iron Age.
So it was on a trade route, and there was a lot of commerce going back and forth from here, and what did that mean economically for the city?
Well, for Megiddo, it meant that it could control the tariff trade and tax a lot of the commodities that were moving in either direction. It also was a very strategic military defensive position which would control the traffic of armies and peoples going in either direction. So it was one of the largest and most significant city-states of the Middle Bronze Age, or of the Canaanites, which would be roughly 2000 BC to about 1500 BC, before the Egyptian army took over this area.
What kind of wars were fought in and around this area?
Well, the first and most famous battle, I would say, would be when the Canaanite coalition, under the leadership of the king of Megiddo, tried to resist the conquest of the Egyptian pharaoh Thutmosis III. And it was Thutmosis who, through a successful stratagem of going through the mountain passes of Samaria to the south here, succeeded in surprising the Canaanite army and defeating them in the valley on the plain that's immediately to my left. And it was this moment that marks the end of the independence of the Canaanite city-states, and for the next 300 years after that, they become part of the Egyptian empire. And the Egyptians then use Megiddo as the main administrative center for the northern part of their empire in the land of Canaan. It controls the trade routes, the military routes, and the passes going up to the Galilee. So this is a very strategic place for the Egyptians after that.
Well, I guess the archaeologists have been working here some 6 or 7 decades now, and they've made a lot of finds in the area. Can you describe some of the major finds that have been uncovered here?
Well, we just mentioned Solomon, and he was one of the great builders, as we know, from the temple that he built in Jerusalem and the palace that was also built there. But he also had to fortify and defend his kingdom and empire, and he took strategic places such as Megiddo and Hazor further to the north, cities that had formerly been under the control of the Canaanites, that were not affiliated with any particular tribal influence, and made them his administrative centers and what the Bible calls the chariot cities, where he would keep the garrisons of his soldiers, his horses for the chariots, and the armor to store and defend the kingdom in case of need.
So have they found any evidence of the Solomonic era?
Right to our left we have 3 large pillars, actually 4 large walls, or piers as they're called, which if they were still standing to their original height would have supported arches that were part of the gateway that led into the city of Megiddo. And the characteristic architecture of Solomon includes arch gates of 4 chambers on either side, which we call the Solomonic Gate, and Megiddo is one of the important examples of that. Hazor has an even better preserved example, and there's another one at Gezzer. The University of Chicago, in their excavations, has removed 1/2 of the gate so that they could excavate to a lower level of the city, where they did find the gate of the Canaanites below. But what we're looking at now are the walls with the characteristic stonework, the dressed stones, which are called ashlars, that were cut to make the foundations for that city wall.
Solomon was the son of David and Bathsheba. He was the 3rd king of Israel, renowned for his wisdom, wealth, and building projects. The high cost of supporting his empire, which stretched from Egypt in the south to Mesopotamia in the north, was staggering. 1 Kings 9:15 says, "And this is the reason of the levy, or tax, which King Solomon raised, for to build the house of the Lord, and his own house, and Millo, and the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazor, and Megiddo, and Gezzer."
Are there any other finds that have been discovered in the area?
Well, the University of Chicago excavations from the 20s and 30s and the renewed excavations of Tel Aviv University in the last 2 years has excavated the area of the Great Cut of the University of Chicago, which is to the northeast. And in that Great Cut, they penetrated to the older remains of the Canaanite city-state and found the sacred area, the area of the temples and part of the palace of the kings of Megiddo. And there's a very important altar of sacrifice, which gives us some idea of the kinds of installations used in the sacrifice in the Canaanite cult. And in the temple we found remains of the deities that were worshipped here by the Canaanites. The god Baal and the goddess Asherah are found in some of the figurines of bronze overlaid with gold, and many of the offerings, the vessels that were also presented here by the citizens, inhabitants of Megiddo, have been found in those excavations. So that's very significant to let us know what the cult of the Canaanites is like.
Well, we've been talking about the past of Megiddo, but the Bible indicates a future for Megiddo, and Armageddon is mentioned in the book of Revelation. What is the connection between Armageddon in the book of Revelation and the site of Megiddo?
Well, I think there's a relationship because of the great battles in the past that had occurred at Megiddo, battles that were epical and that it changed the course of history, particularly going back to the Josiah and his death here in the plain of Megiddo. That was always in the conscience of the Israelites, and in the time of Jesus, when there's a new anointed one, the Messiah, which is what anointed means in Israelite kingship, that was providing the hope that again Israel was going to be restored under a new Davidic Messiah, which is also mentioned in Revelation, and that with this new Messiah there would be one final battle that would end all battles and end the suffering and the problems of persecution that the people in the time when the book of Revelation was written were suffering.
It's intriguing that when Christ returns, he will conclude the final war of Armageddon, which begins here at Megiddo.
This is the same place where the last good king in Jerusalem, Josiah, lost his life fighting Pharaoh Necho. Josiah's descendant, the Messiah himself, will avenge Josiah's death and the martyrdom of all the saints in this final war, beginning at Megiddo.
Can you tell me how it is that you, as an archaeologist, have devoted your life, as it were, to this kind of work? What makes it so important to you?
Well, the archaeology gives you the tangible evidence that lets you physically touch periods of the past that the text will describe and put into your mind. And the excavations then provide artifacts, clues to further give us much more information to interpret what the texts are telling us, because there are many passages which are rather cryptic or left kind of vague. We don't get a lot of details sometimes, but we're very curious to know more about what these events were and how they evolved and how they affected people to lead to the various beliefs that we have now. So to try to understand my own beliefs and to get in touch with where those beliefs are from, I've just chosen archaeology here in Israel, biblical archaeology in particular, to get an understanding of what the origins of Judaism were, the origins of Christianity, and then how, from my own experience and my own beliefs, I can understand all of that and get some satisfaction, as well as this continuity of time that is found here on these mounds, which are large layer cakes of time machines, really, of ancient civilization.
Do you believe that archaeology has helped illuminate the scriptures to a great degree?
Without question. If we didn't have archaeology in the land over the last 100 years, we would still be somewhat skeptical, perhaps, of the historicity of the biblical text, because we wouldn't have any other measure for testing and augmenting our knowledge. And in science, and we live in a scientific age, they always want to have experiments which can demonstrate with other means of evidence whether something is verifiable or not. So the excavations have enabled us to come up with new data, new inscriptions like the Dan inscription that mention the house of David, Beit David, and the name of a couple of its kings. And we have here excavations with tablets from the Bronze Age that mention some of the Canaanite kings from before that. So all of that helps us understand the biblical past and makes it more relevant and more assertive for ourselves.
Coming up, we'll find out why archaeologists are so excited about recent finds in the ashes of Hazor.
Come with Zola Levitt and see for yourself the land of the covenant.
I do not see how it could have been any better with what was chosen for us to do, as well as who guided us, who spoke with us, the other people on the trip. It was wonderful.
Tour the Holy Land with Zola Levitt. Call or write for more information.
This is the tell, or archaeological site, of the ancient biblical city called Hazor. In the King James Bible, the name is written as though it were Hazor, but in today's Hebrew, Hazor is spelled phonetically with a T, becoming Hazor. We've already seen that Hazor was important to King Solomon, along with Megiddo and Jerusalem. Before Solomon, however, it had been a Canaanite city, delivered into the hand of Israel through the exploits of Joshua. Joshua 11:11 says, "They smote all the souls that were therein," in Hazor, "with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was not any left to breathe. And he burnt Hazor with fire." Tom talks now with Amon Ben Tor about the recent archaeological findings in the ruins of Hazor.
It's good to be with you, Amnon, in the Hebrew University and the Archaeological Museum you have here. I understand you being in charge of the Hazor excavations You've made many interesting finds, and one of the most interesting is the Canaanite deity. Can you describe this for us?
First of all, it's one of the Canaanite deities, because we have a few. But this is the most, how shall I say it, impressive one, or largest of all. It's definitely the biggest one found in this country, and I think also there is nothing similar. That's one big problem, because we don't have anything to compare it with. It was found, as you can see, it was smashed to hundreds of pieces, and it was found in the destruction level of the palace. It was found in the throne room on the right-hand side as you enter the throne room.
It's made of stone?
It's made of basalt.
Basalt.
Very, very hard stone, but it cracked. And here we have a problem. Maybe I'll return to this later. What part of the destruction was caused accidentally by the fire, and what part was caused, if at all, intentionally? Because several other of the statues, deities as well as, how shall we say it, humans, kings, were deliberately destroyed as part of the destruction of Hazor, and that's a very, very important issue. But returning to this one, first of all, it's unusual, as I already said. Second, we cannot identify it yet. It has only been put together a few weeks ago, and the study of it has not yet been started. For temporarily, we call him the Lord of Punch, because of this huge bowl which he had here, and he was holding a cup in his right hand. You can see the negative of the cup. So the cup was made out of different material. Many of these deities hold a cup in their hands, in art, like in cylinder seals, in glyptics, and so on. So he held the cup in his hand, but this cup was movable, okay? There was some liquid in here. We don't know which kind of liquid, and there was probably a connection between the liquid and the cup. What exactly was going on, we don't know. As I told you, we don't have anything similar yet.
It's assumed, I suppose, that this was some kind of offering receptacle, and
let's assume, or let's hypothesize, there was some oil or some wine in here. People would come and either drink it or pour it on themselves, or do something with it. Another very important feature here, as you can see, there is no head. Yes. But the head, up here you'll see a kind of a hole to contain a head. So the head was definitely made of different material, maybe of wood, covered with gold, or some kind of material, but the head is gone. So we are very, very sorry, of course, that the head is gone, but let's be happy with what we have.
You mentioned destruction. There's evidence of definite destruction of the city of Hazor.
There is evidence of a massive destruction. I once called it the mother of all destructions in Hazor. Wherever you come down to the end of the Canaanite strata, you come upon this destruction. It is an unbelievable destruction, which is found again everywhere and left behind thick debris of ashes. There was a terrible fire in the palace, so much so that the bricks vitrified. Some of the vessels, the clay vessels, melted. We can clearly say that the temperatures was more than 1200 degrees centigrade. When a normal fire is about 600, 700 degrees. So how did this happen? We found evidence of a lot of timber, which was used in the construction of the palace. It's mud brick and timber. By the way, the timber is all Lebanon cedar, all of it. All the 10 pieces that we saw, 11 pieces that we saw for
imported from Lebanon.
From Lebanon. Yeah. Which again shows you how important the building was, just like the temple in Jerusalem, imported timber from Lebanon. So this is number one. Maybe even, and this is something we started thinking about already last season, and maybe this season we found more proof for it, even though it's very difficult for me to accept. The entire floor of the palace was a parquet floor. The entire floor was built of wooden planks. We found quite a few of them. So this is one. Two, if you look at these enormous jars, this one here, this comes from the palace, and we have dozens of them in the palace. And some of them, maybe all of them, but in some we can prove it, they contained oil. The oil is not there anymore, but the spillage and the fire left very, very distinctive marks. So you have timber, you have oil, and you told me you were at Hazor. If you were there in the afternoon, do you remember the wind? The wind there is unbelievable at Hazor. Put these three together, you'll get this kind of fire.
Very intense heat.
Very intense heat. So this fire destroyed a lot, but also preserved a lot. The bricks are as hard as stone. It destroyed the statue. Maybe not all the destruction of it was caused by fire, but all the stones exploded. Basalt stone exploded because of the fire. They all cracked, let's put it like this. So, and if you go back to the book of Joshua, you may remember that in the story of the destruction of Hazor, it says that Hazor, after killing all the people, the Israelites set Hazor on fire, and it was only Hazor that was destroyed by fire. Well, it's not only Hazor. By excavating other sites, we know that other sites were also destroyed by fire. But there, maybe the term was part of, how shall we call it, the common language. When you want to say that a place was utterly destroyed, you also throw the fire in. And in the case of Hazor, they were interested to tell about how intensive the destruction of Hazor was, and the reason given, because Hazor was once the head of all those kingdoms, the most important of the Canaanite city-states.
So Joshua took the whole land, according to all that the Lord said unto Moses. And Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel, according to their divisions by their tribes. And the land rested from war. Here in the ancient city of Hazor, the stones cry out with evidence of incredible destruction. It was all part of God's eternal plan and provision for his chosen people. Just recently, this relatively unassuming site was read about worldwide when a couple of small clay tablets were discovered. Bentor was quoted as saying the tablets are, quote, "in my opinion, the most important of all documents found in this country," unquote.
Also, we understand in this marvelous palace, the things that you found, there have been some tablets and inscriptions and the hope of more. What have you found already?
I am very glad that you say also, because it means that these are not less important. Because other people say, forget all this, where is the archive? This is what everybody keeps asking. And this is indeed a big problem. We are looking for an archive, of course, because an archive can give us unbelievable information. There's a lot we can say about this. But think for a minute that we had an inscription saying this is so-and-so, built by so-and-so, and we would know a lot more, okay? It's a different dimension of knowledge once you have the archive. And so much was written about Hazor in Mari, and there must have been an archive. And we are getting, as we go on, more and more and more proof that there was one.
And do you have some of those tablets that have been found?
I happen to have two of those found in the last season. Each and every one, I'll tell you, it is the most important and the most exciting. This one here, this is of the 18th century. And this is a school text. This is a multiplication table. And as you know, the Babylonians, of which we were part, culturally speaking,
Father Abraham came,
whatever, perhaps, they were working, their mathematics was based on not on the decimal system as ours, but on the sexagesimal system. Okay, like our watch, 60, like our month, 30, like our year, 360, which by the way is much more logical. Because 10 you can divide only by 2, by 5, and by itself, by 10. But 60 you can divide by 2, by 3, by 4, by 5, by 6, by 10, by 12, by 15. But somehow we are using a different system. But this one here is built according to that system. So here we have a school text in which the pupil learns two things. First of all, he learns how to write. How to write 2, how to write 3, how to write 6, how to write 9. He also learns the multiplication table, because here it says 2 times 3 is 6, 3 times 2 is 6, 3 times 6 is 18, and so on, and so on and so forth. So he learns, first of all, how to write the numbers. Second, how to do the multiplication. And this is a master text. The pupil, this is not the work of a student. It is the master from which the students copy. So, and by the way, it's the first one of its kind to be found so far away west from the center, let's say in Mesopotamia or in Babylon. So it is extremely important, and some people are already working on trying to publish it, and it will be published, I hope, within a month or two in the Israel Exploration Journal.
Well, Tom, it must have been fun to meet Professor Bentor.
He was a very fascinating personality. And when I was talking with Professor Bentor, he said that the only documents we do have is the story in the Bible. And he was speaking about contemporary documents concerning Hazor and places like Jericho and Bethel and all these stories that we read about in the scriptures, but there are no other contemporary documents about them.
People that lived there didn't write about these cities in ancient times, and other people didn't write.
Undoubtedly they did, but there's nothing extant, and we don't have anything left
just
except
have
the
to
Bible.
rely on Scripture.
But now we're uncovering things, and the archaeologists are finding great things that confirm and verify and explain a lot of things that are in the Bible. For instance, there at Hazor, they've uncovered this ash layer of destruction. And it is a tremendous destruction, a great fire, a great conflagration that occurred there. And it's pretty clear that that was what happened during the time of Joshua. Mm-hmm. It says that he burned the city with fire, and it was an extremely hot fire, as the professor explains to us how it came to be such a great heat.
I'll tell you, well, the stones will continue to cry out. This is obviously a series where we're learning too, and I'm so glad to bring it to you. Next week, in upcoming times, Zippori, where Jesus spent a lot of his boyhood, apparently, and Qumran, where continuing work goes on with the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were originally discovered at Qumran. Petra, which many people are interested in and say that perhaps it's where the Israelis will flee when the Antichrist comes and so on. And our tours go to Petra now in Jordan, since there's peaceful relations of Israel and Jordan. The only existing evidence of crucifixion, coming up in one of our programs. There is evidence of crucifixion, and I mean scientific evidence, and look at our web page on the computer. And as you do so, Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim, pray for the peace of Jerusalem.